On a summer day in July 2012, an accountant named Michel Gauvreau walked into a warehouse in the small Quebec town of Saint-Louis-de-Blanfort to conduct a routine inventory check. The warehouse held 16,000 large metal barrels stacked 20 feet high, each one supposedly containing 54 gallons of thick golden maple syrup. Each barrel was worth approximately $1,800. Gauvreau climbed onto one of them to get a better view of the count. It wobbled. A barrel full of maple syrup weighs roughly 600 pounds and does not wobble. He banged on it. It rang out like a gong. He opened it. It was either empty or filled with water. He checked another. Same thing. Then another. Somewhere between 2,700 and 3,000 tons of maple syrup, valued at $18.7 million, had been stolen. Not from a bank, not from an art gallery, from a warehouse full of maple syrup. This was, in every measurable sense, one of the largest thefts in Canadian history. The warehouse was not just any warehouse. It was the Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve, maintained by the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, a regulatory body that manages approximately 72% of the world's entire maple syrup supply. The reserve existed for one specific purpose: to stabilize the global price of maple syrup during years when bad weather produced poor harvests. The same way some governments hold petroleum reserves against energy shocks, Quebec holds syrup reserves against syrup shocks. The theft of $18 million from this reserve was, in the logic of the global maple syrup market, a geopolitical event. That is the sentence that contains the whole story this video is about. Canada, and specifically one Canadian province, controls enough of a single global food product that the theft of its strategic reserve constitutes a geopolitical event. And the reason Canada has this power, the reason 72% of the world's maple syrup comes from Quebec, the reason a strategic reserve exists at all, comes down to a tree, a very specific temperature window, and 40 years of patience. Before the economics, the biology. Because what makes Canadian maple syrup different from every imitation and every substitute is not branding or regulatory protection, though both of those things exist and matter. It is a biological and geographical accident so specific that it has never been successfully replicated anywhere else at commercial scale. The sugar maple, Acer saccharum, grows across the northeastern corner of North America. It is a beautiful tree, a slow-growing, long-lived hardwood that reaches full productive maturity at approximately 40 years of age. You tap a sugar maple in its 40th year, and it will continue producing for another 100, sometimes 200, years after that. The sap it produces in late winter contains sucrose at a concentration of approximately 2 to 5%, which sounds modest, but is substantially higher than the sap of any other maple species. It is just barely enough sugar to make the industrial process of converting sap into syrup economically viable. That conversion process is straightforward and entirely dependent on heat. The sap, which looks and tastes like very slightly sweet water, is boiled until 80% of its volume evaporates, concentrating the sugars into the thick, amber, deeply flavored liquid that the world puts on pancakes. The ratio is approximately 40 liters of raw sap needed to produce 1 liter of finished maple syrup. 40 liters of sap boiled down to fill one bottle. The labor, the fuel, the equipment, and the time embedded in that single bottle explain immediately why pure maple syrup costs what it costs, and why nobody has found a profitable shortcut. The critical element, the one that makes the whole system work, and the one that only certain places on Earth can provide reliably, is the freeze-thaw cycle. For sap to flow from the roots of a maple tree up through its trunk in the volumes needed for commercial tapping, the temperature needs to drop below freezing at night and rise above freezing during the day. The repeated contraction and expansion of water and gas within the tree's vascular system creates a pressure differential that pushes the sap upward. Tap the tree during this window and sap flows freely. Wait until the night temperatures stay above freezing, or tap when everything is still frozen solid and the sap does not run. This window, which lasts between 4 and 8 weeks in late winter and early spring, typically running from February through April, is the entire productive season for the entire maple syrup industry. Everything happens in those weeks. The taps are inserted, the sap is collected, the boiling begins, the syrup is produced, the inventory is built. Then the buds form on the maples, the sap chemistry changes, the season ends, and the operation shuts down until the following year. One annual window, no second chances. The geography that provides this window most reliably, most consistently, and most productively is a narrow band of the northeastern North American continent, running through Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and most abundantly through the Laurentian and Appalachian highlands of Quebec. The temperatures there, the altitude, the frost patterns, the particular combination of cold nights and warming days that arrives dependably each February and March, produce the ideal pressure cycles for sap flow. Other maple growing regions exist. Maple trees grow across a much wider range, but the specific freeze-thaw reliability of this zone, and particularly of Quebec, combined with the extraordinary density of sugar maples in the Quebec forest, makes it categorically different from anywhere else. Quebec currently has 55.6 million active taps in production. The province has mapped an additional 178 million potential taps that could theoretically be added as demand grows. To put that in perspective, the entire Vermont maple syrup industry, which is the largest in the United States, has fewer taps than Quebec has the potential to add in a single expansion phase. The scale is simply incomparable. And the organizational structure that manages and markets this scale is one of the most unusual commercial arrangements in the global food industry. The Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, known by its French acronym FPAQ, and more recently as Producteurs et Productrices Acéricoles du Québec, or PPAQ, operates what is essentially a supply management cartel for maple syrup. This comparison is made explicitly and frequently, including by the Federation's own critics. The FPAQ controls the production quotas of approximately 7,300 producers. A maple syrup producer in Quebec cannot simply decide to tap more trees and sell more syrup. They must operate within the quota assigned to them by the Federation. Maple syrup produced outside the quota system cannot be legally sold through normal commercial channels. The Federation acts as the single sales desk for all Quebec maple syrup, negotiating with buyers collectively rather than allowing individual producers to compete on price. Revenue is pooled and distributed according to quota. The system is compulsory, enforced by Quebec provincial law, and has been deeply controversial among producers who chafe at the restrictions. But the system also works, in the specific sense of delivering what it was designed to deliver: price stability. Before the FPAQ formalized its supply management model, the maple syrup market suffered from the same boom-bust cycle that afflicts most agricultural commodities. Good harvest years drove prices down. Bad harvest years drove prices up. Producers could not plan. Buyers could not plan. The industry was volatile in ways that discouraged the long-term investment needed to plant and maintain maple groves, since you are committing 40 years of tree growing time against a price that may be unacceptably low when the trees finally reach maturity. The Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve, the warehouse that Michel Gauvreau walked into in 2012, was the FPAQ's mechanism for managing this problem. In strong harvest years, surplus syrup is held in reserve, rather than flooding the market and driving prices down. In weak harvest years, the reserve releases product to meet demand and prevent price spikes. It functions exactly like a central bank managing a currency, smoothing out the natural volatility of a commodity whose annual supply is entirely dependent on 6 weeks of weather patterns. The target level for the reserve is approximately 100 to 125 million pounds of syrup. The theft of $18 million worth of inventory from this reserve in 2011 and 2012 was therefore not just a property crime. It was an assault on the price stabilization mechanism for a product that 72% of the world depends on for its supply. The man who organized the theft was Richard Vallière, known in Quebec syrup circles as a barrel roller, a term for people who move maple syrup through channels outside the official FPAQ system. Vallière had been fined $1.8 million by the FPAQ in 2007 for selling syrup illegally. His revenge took the form of a carefully organized multi-month operation in which a team of truck drivers, sugar shack workers, and syrup dealers rented space in the same warehouse complex, used that access to move barrels under cover of darkness, replaced the stolen syrup with water to delay discovery, load more than 100 truckloads of contraband over several months, and sell the stolen product on the black market in New Brunswick and the United States. The warehouse had no cameras, no alarm system, and only a single daily security check. 26 suspects were eventually arrested. Only about 25% of the stolen syrup was ever recovered, most of it having been blended into legal batches before anyone realized it was missing. Vallière was convicted and sentenced to prison. The FPAQ invested approximately 4 million Canadian dollars building a new reserve facility in Laurierville, known locally as La Forteresse du Sirop d'Érable, the Maple Syrup Fortress, with bank-level surveillance and access controls. A condiment now has a fortress. The numbers the system produces are not modest. In 2024, Canada's total maple syrup harvest reached a record 19.9 million gallons, driven by an exceptional season in Quebec, where freeze-thaw cycles were nearly ideal across the entire productive period. Quebec alone produced 18 million gallons of that total, approximately 90% of the Canadian national harvest. Canadian exports of maple products in 2024 were valued at $837 million. In 2025, exports reached £181 million, valued at over $844 million. Sales in 2024 were 23% higher than in 2023, driven by growing global demand for natural sweeteners as consumers move away from artificial alternatives. The global maple syrup market is valued at approximately $1.54 billion and is projected to reach $2.6 billion by 2032. The United States absorbs 60 to 65% of Quebec's exports, a value of approximately $400 million annually from Quebec alone. Germany, the United Kingdom, and Japan are the next largest markets, each importing tens of millions of dollars annually. The product reaches 69 countries. Japan's appetite for maple syrup in particular has grown significantly, driven partly by a broader cultural embrace of Canadian food products, and partly by the use of maple syrup in Japanese pastry and confectionery applications that have no direct equivalent in Western baking traditions. The threat that now hangs over this extraordinary system is both meteorological and political. The meteorological threat is climate change. The freeze-thaw cycle that drives the sap flow is precisely the kind of delicate temperature relationship that is disrupted as winters warm. Research published by Natural Resources Canada projects that the optimal zone for maple syrup production will shift northward as temperatures rise, potentially moving out of the traditional Quebec heartland toward higher latitudes where the freeze-thaw pattern is still reliable. Some Quebec producers are already noting earlier springs, shorter tapping windows, and less predictable sap flows compared to previous generations. The trees take 40 years to grow. If the climate changes faster than new groves can be established in better positioned locations, the industry faces structural disruption that no reserve and no fortress can fully buffer against. The political threat arrived in early 2025, when the United States government indicated the possibility of 25% tariffs on Canadian agricultural imports, including maple syrup. Given that 60 to 65% of Quebec's exports go directly to American buyers, a 25% tariff would represent a profound disruption to the industry's economics, potentially making Canadian maple syrup significantly less competitive against domestic American production from Vermont and New York, at exactly the moment when those American producers are expanding their operations and seeking larger market share. The FPAQ is responding by diversifying export markets, pursuing growth in Asia and Europe, and investing in marketing to build direct consumer awareness of the specific quality and provenance of Quebec maple syrup in markets where it is currently purchased without much brand differentiation. The strategic reserve is being maintained at higher levels than usual to allow flexible responses to demand shifts, and Quebec producers continue planting new groves of sugar maples that will reach productive maturity in 4 decades, betting that the world's appetite for their specific product will still exist when those trees are finally ready. It is, in some ways, the most patient agricultural bet on earth. You plant a tree today whose commercial value will not be realized until 2065. You maintain it, manage the forest around it, invest in the infrastructure to tap and process its sap, and hold the whole system together through an organization that manages global supply and price with the rigor of an oil ministry, all in the service of a product whose entire annual production happens in a 6-week window that depends on the weather cooperating. The remarkable thing is not that this system is complicated. The remarkable thing is that it works. Canada is the second largest country in the world by total area, stretching across 9.98 million square kilometers, which makes it larger than the entire European Union. And yet, its population of approximately 40 million people is smaller than the state of California. Most of Canada is very nearly empty, and the parts that aren't empty are right next to the American border, which is itself the longest international boundary on Earth, at 8,891 kilometers. That vast emptiness contains things that sound implausible when stated plainly. Canada has more lakes than the rest of the world combined. Estimates put the number at over 2 million, covering approximately 9% of the country's total surface area. The Great Lakes alone, shared with the United States, contain 18% of the world's fresh surface water. Canada also has the longest coastline of any country on Earth, stretching over 202,000 kilometers along 3 oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Arctic. If you walked 20 kilometers per day along Canada's coastline without stopping, the journey would take approximately 30 years. In Churchill, Manitoba, a town on the western shore of Hudson Bay, residents leave their car doors unlocked. Not from carelessness, as a precautionary measure. Each autumn, hundreds of polar bears migrate through Churchill on their way from inland to the ice forming on the bay, and it is considered useful for people to have access to an unlocked vehicle as a quick refuge if a bear appears unexpectedly. Churchill has a polar bear jail, a large facility where bears that stray too close to the human settlement are held safely until they can be relocated. The town's tourism industry is built around viewing polar bears in the wild, and Churchill is known internationally as the polar bear capital of the world. Canada holds approximately 60% of the world's polar bear population, between 16,000 and 19,000 bears. In Ontario, in 2009, the provincial legislature passed the Apology Act. The law exists because Canadians apologize so frequently and so reflexively that it had become a genuine legal concern. When a Canadian says sorry, does that constitute an admission of fault? The Apology Act resolves this by establishing that no apology made in Ontario can be taken as evidence of liability in civil proceedings. Sorry, in Ontario, is legally just sorry. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong, it means you are Canadian. Canada's official postal code for Santa Claus is H0H0H0. The Canada Post receives hundreds of thousands of letters addressed to Santa each year, and since 1974 has maintained a program of responding to every single one of them, in the language in which the letter was written. Canadian postal workers volunteer their personal time to answer children's letters to Santa. This is not a fringe operation. It is a large-scale annual logistical effort involving thousands of volunteer responses, maintained for over 50 years. The bear that inspired Winnie the Pooh was Canadian. During the First World War, a Canadian soldier from Winnipeg named Harry Colburn bought a small black bear cub from a hunter in Ontario, named her Winnie after his home city, and brought her with him to England. When he was deployed to France, he left Winnie at the London Zoo. A boy named Christopher Robin visited the zoo frequently and became attached to the bear. His father was A. Milne. The rest is literary history. A bear from Winnipeg, acquired by a Canadian soldier living in a London zoo, inspired one of the most beloved children's characters in the history of English literature. The character was originally named after the Canadian city. James Naismith, the Canadian physical education instructor who invented basketball in 1891 while working in Springfield, Massachusetts, was born in Almonte, Ontario. He nailed 2 pitch baskets to the elevated running track of a YMCA gymnasium and divided his students into 2 teams. The game needed rules, which he wrote, needing 13 of them. The game has changed considerably since then, including the replacement of pitch baskets with hoops, but the fundamental structure Naismith designed in 1891 is still the structure of the sport watched by billions of people today. Basketball was invented by a Canadian. Canada does not get enough credit for this, and somewhere in Quebec, in a forest of sugar maples that will not be ready to tap for another 15 or 20 years, new trees are growing. Their sap, when the time comes, will be collected during 6 weeks of February and March freeze-thaw cycles, boiled down at a ratio of 40 liters to 1, stored in barrels in a fortress with cameras and alarm systems and multiple daily security checks, managed by an organization that functions as an OPEC for amber liquid, and eventually exported to 69 countries as one of the most distinctive and defensible agricultural products in the world. A tree, a temperature window, 40 years of patience, and a strategic reserve that someone once tried to rob and almost got away with.